Makina Johnson stood in her wedding dress, watching her beautiful three-tier cake fall to the ground with a loud crash. White frosting splattered everywhere. Pink roses from her decorations lay crushed under someone's boots. Her heart broke into a million pieces. The morning had started so perfectly. Makina had woken up early to watch the sunrise from her bedroom window. She remembered being a little girl dreaming of this day. Back then, she lived in a tiny apartment with her mother Rosa, who worked cleaning buildings all night long. Rosa would come home tired, but always made time to braid Makina's hair and help with homework. "Mia, you can be anything you want in this world," Rosa would say every morning before school. "But you have to work twice as hard to get half as much respect. Never forget that." Now here was Makina in her dream dress, in her own house, about to marry the man she loved more than anything. The white satin felt smooth against her skin. The pearl buttons down the back had belonged to her grandmother. Everything was perfect until the neighbors came over. "Get out of our neighborhood," shouted Mrs. Henderson from next door. "We don't want your kind here making all this noise." Makina's eyes filled with tears. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She was marrying David, the love of her life. In the backyard of their new home, everything had been perfect. Until the neighbors came over angry and mean. The Hendersons had been watching Makina and David ever since they moved in 4 weeks ago. Every morning, Mrs. Henderson would peek through her curtains when Makina left for work. Every evening, Mr. Henderson would stare over the fence when David worked in their garden. They never waved. They never smiled. They just watched with suspicious eyes. "Please stop," Makina said softly. "This is my wedding day." Mr. Henderson laughed in a cruel way. "Wedding day for criminals and troublemakers. We called the cops on you people." Makina felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. How could people be so mean to someone they didn't even know? She thought about all the nights she stayed up, studying in college. She remembered working at the law library until midnight. She thought about all the people she had helped as mayor. Makina's best friend, Sarah, ran over and put her arm around Makina. "How can people be so hateful?" Sarah whispered. "Your wedding is beautiful." Sarah had known Makina since they were both 7 years old. They met in 2nd grade when Sarah defended Makina from bullies who made fun of her old shoes. Sarah came from a rich family, but she never cared about money or fancy things. She cared about friendship and loyalty. "I should have known this would happen," Makina whispered to Sarah. "Every time I think things are getting better, something like this reminds me that some people will never accept me." The other neighbors stood behind the Hendersons, nodding their heads. Mrs. Thompson from 3 houses down crossed her arms and glared. Mr. Wilson from across the street shook his head like he was disappointed. The Johnsons from next door on the other side pretended to water their plants, but were really just watching the drama. They had all lived on Maple Street for many years. Their children had grown up playing together. They had block parties every summer and exchanged Christmas cookies every winter. When Makina and David moved in last month, everything changed. The neighbors started having secret meetings in each other's living rooms. They whispered about property values going down. They made up stories about crime rates rising. They complained about loud music that wasn't even playing. They found reasons to be upset about everything Makina and David did. When Makina planted roses in her front yard, Mrs. Thompson complained they were the wrong color. When David fixed their mailbox, Mr. Wilson said it looked too fancy for the neighborhood. When Makina brought cookies to introduce herself, Mrs. Henderson wouldn't even open her door. "Don't encourage them," Mrs. Henderson had told the other neighbors. "If we're nice, they'll think they belong here." Makina had grown up in a small apartment with her mom Rosa, who worked 3 jobs just to pay rent. Rosa cleaned offices at night, served breakfast at a diner in the morning, and took care of elderly people in the afternoon. She never complained. She never gave up. She just worked and worked so Makina could have a better life. "Mia, Education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, Rosa would say when McKenna felt tired from studying. Learn everything you can. Be smarter than everyone who tries to put you down. McKenna remembered being 8 years old, doing homework at the kitchen table, while Rosa ironed other people's clothes to make extra money. The apartment was tiny and the walls were thin. Sometimes, McKenna could hear the neighbors arguing or playing music too loud. But their little home was filled with love and dreams. In high school, McKenna was class president 3 years in a row. She organized food drives for hungry families. She tutored kids who struggled with reading. She started a program to help immigrant parents learn English. Even as a teenager, she was already helping her community. I worked so hard to get here, McKenna thought to herself. Why do they hate me when they don't even know me? David came running from inside the house when he heard the shouting. He was tall and strong with gentle brown eyes that always made McKenna feel safe. His hands were dirty from helping set up tables and chairs all morning. He had been hanging string lights and arranging flowers with such care and love. David and McKenna had met 5 years ago at the community center, where she was teaching free law classes to people who couldn't afford lawyers. David was there learning about his rights as a tenant when his landlord was trying to evict him unfairly. McKenna helped him fight the eviction, and they fell in love while working together. She's the strongest person I've ever met, David always told his friends. She fights for people who can't fight for themselves. She never gives up on anyone. David worked as a teacher at the elementary school downtown. He taught 4th grade and loved seeing children learn new things every day. His classroom walls were covered with drawings his students made and thank you letters from parents. He believed every child could succeed if someone believed in them. What's happening here? David asked, looking at his destroyed wedding decorations that he had spent weeks planning. The wedding decorations had been David's surprise for McKenna. He knew she had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, but they didn't have much money. So David worked extra hours tutoring students to save up for decorations. He made paper flowers by hand during his lunch breaks. He borrowed string lights from the school. He painted wooden signs with quotes about love. These people ruined our wedding cake, Sarah said, pointing at the Hendersons. They're being horrible to McKenna. David felt anger rise up in his chest, but he stayed calm. He learned from McKenna that fighting hate with hate never works. McKenna taught him that kindness and strength could change hearts better than anger ever could. But seeing his bride crying on their wedding day made him want to shout at these cruel neighbors. McKenna's mother Rosa came outside when she heard the commotion. Rosa was a small woman, but she had the strength of 10 people. She had raised McKenna by herself after McKenna's father left when McKenna was just 2 years old. Rosa never dated anyone else. She said McKenna was her whole world, and she didn't eat anything else. What is wrong with you people? Rosa said in her thick accent. She was so angry, her hands were shaking. My daughter is a good person. She helps everyone in the city. How dare you ruin her special day? Rosa remembered all the times people had been cruel to her and McKenna when McKenna was little. Store clerks who followed them around like they were going to steal something. Teachers who said McKenna would never amount to anything. Neighbors who called the police when Rosa played music from her country. You don't scare me, Rosa continued, getting braver. I worked my whole life so my daughter could have a better future than me. She's the mayor of this whole city, and you don't even know it. Sir, ma'am, David said politely to the Hendersons, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was breaking for McKenna. We just want to celebrate our wedding peacefully. We're good people who work hard and pay our taxes. We've never bothered anyone. David thought about all the times McKenna came home exhausted from long days at City Hall but still made dinner and helped him grade papers. He thought about how she visited sick people in hospitals on weekends. He thought about how she used her own money to buy school supplies for kids who couldn't afford them. Mrs. Henderson single quotes, his face was red with anger. She had worked herself up into such a rage that she wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Good people don't throw loud parties disturbing the whole street. Good people don't move into neighborhoods where they don't belong. But our wedding music isn't even playing yet, Makana said, confused and hurt. We haven't started the ceremony. The only sound you could hear was us talking quietly and setting up chairs. Makana looked at her watch. It was only 11 in the morning. The wedding wasn't supposed to start until 2 in the afternoon. Most of the guests hadn't even arrived yet. Only the family and wedding party were there helping set up. The truth was the neighbors just didn't want black people in their neighborhood. They had made up their minds the day Makana and David moved in. They made up complaints that weren't real. They created problems that didn't exist. They wanted to scare Makina and David into leaving before they got too comfortable. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward from the group of neighbors. She was an older woman with gray hair who had lived on Maple Street longer than anyone else. We've had a peaceful street for 30 years, she said in a shaky voice. We don't want that to change, but we want peace too, Makana replied, trying to reason with her. We want to be good neighbors. We want to take care of our house and help make this street even better. Mr. Wilson, a retired police officer, shook his head. People like you always say that at first. Then the trouble starts. The parties get louder. The friends get rougher. Property values go down. Makana felt like crying, but she held back her tears. She had heard these same lies her whole life. People who didn't know her making up stories about who she was and what she would do. People deciding she was dangerous before she even opened her mouth. Just then police sirens got louder and louder. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house with their lights flashing. Makina's heart started beating so fast she thought it might burst. She knew that sometimes when police came to help black people, things went very wrong. She had seen it on the news too many times. Makina grabbed David's hand and squeezed it tight. Sarah moved closer to stand beside her best friend. Rosa came over and put her arm around her daughter's waist. They all stood together, facing whatever was going to happen next. Oh no, whispered Sarah. This could get really bad really fast. The wedding guests who were inside the house came out to see what was happening. David's parents, Robert and Linda, rushed to their son's side. Makina's aunts and uncles gathered around Rosa. Everyone looked scared and worried. Makina's uncle, Miguel, had been a construction worker his whole life. He had been pulled over by police many times for no good reason. Stay calm, Nia, he whispered to Makina. Don't give them any excuse to hurt you. Officer Martinez stepped out of the first car. He was a 15-year veteran of the police force who had seen everything during his career. He believed strongly in treating every person with dignity and respect, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. His own parents had immigrated from Mexico when he was young, so he understood what it felt like to be treated badly because of who you were. Officer Johnson came from the second car. He was newer to the force but had a good heart and wanted to help people solve their problems peacefully. Both officers walked toward the group of people in the backyard. Taking in the scene carefully, Officer Martinez immediately noticed the wedding decorations scattered on the ground and the destroyed cake. He saw Makina in her beautiful white dress with tears running down her cheeks. He saw David in his black suit looking protective of his bride. He saw the angry neighbors standing in a group pointing fingers. We got a complaint about a disturbance and loud music, Officer Martinez said, looking around at the quiet backyard. He didn't hear any music playing. He didn't see any rowdy behavior. He just saw what looked like wedding preparations that had been destroyed. These people are disturbing our peaceful neighborhood, Mr. Henderson said quickly, trying to take control of the situation. They're having wild parties and causing all kinds of problems for decent folks. Officer Martinez had been doing this job long enough to know when someone was lying. He looked at his watch and saw it was still morning. He looked around the backyard and saw Folding chairs set up in neat rows and a small altar decorated with flowers. This didn't look like a wild party. To him, "I don't hear any music, sir," Officer Martinez said calmly. "And I don't see any signs of a disturbance. What exactly is the problem here?" While they were about to play music, Mrs. Henderson added quickly, realizing how weak their complaint sounded. "Really loud music that would wake up the whole neighborhood." Officer Johnson walked closer to McKenna. Something about her face looked familiar, but he couldn't quite remember where he had seen her before. She looked so dignified and calm despite obviously being upset about something. "Ma'am, are you having a wedding here today?" Officer Johnson asked gently, trying to understand what was really happening. "Yes, sir," McKenna said in a voice that shook with emotion. "We live here now. We bought this house fair and square. We just wanted to have a small wedding ceremony in our backyard with our family and closest friends." McKenna's voice was soft, but there was strength in it, too. Officer Johnson could tell she was educated and well-spoken. She didn't sound like someone who would cause trouble in a neighborhood. Officer Martinez looked at the Hendersons and the other neighbors with a stern expression. As a police officer, he had seen his share of neighbor disputes, but this one felt different. The evidence didn't match the complaint at all. "Did you folks destroy this wedding cake and these decorations?" Officer Martinez asked directly. "They shouldn't be having parties in a nice neighborhood like this," Mrs. Henderson said defensively, avoiding the question. "People who don't belong here always cause problems. That doesn't give you the right to destroy someone's private property," Officer Martinez replied firmly. "And from what I can see, these people have every right to use their own backyard for a wedding." The other neighbors started looking uncomfortable. They realized their complaints sounded silly when a police officer was asking them to explain exactly what laws were being broken. Deep down, most of them knew they were just being mean because they were afraid of change. McKenna stepped forward with her head held high. Even though she was scared and hurt and angry, she found her strongest voice. This was the same voice she used when she gave speeches at city council meetings. This was the voice she used when she stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. "Officers, I need you to know that we are honest, law-abiding citizens," McKenna said clearly, her voice getting stronger with each word. "We bought this house through a legitimate real estate agent. We pay our mortgage on time every month. We pay our property taxes. We both have good, respectable jobs that serve our community. We have never been in trouble with the law. We just want to live in peace and be good neighbors to everyone." McKenna thought about all the times her mother Rosa had taught her to speak up for herself with dignity and pride. "Stand tall, Mia," Rosa would say. "Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are. You are just as good as anyone else." Officer Johnson kept staring at McKenna's face, trying to place where he had seen her before. There was something so familiar about her confident way of speaking and her kind but strong expression. Then suddenly, like a light bulb turning on in his mind, Officer Johnson's eyes went wide with complete surprise and shock. "Wait just 1 minute," Officer Johnson said slowly, his voice filled with amazement. "I know who you are. Aren't you Mayor Johnson?" The entire backyard went completely silent. You could have heard a feather drop to the ground. Mrs. Henderson single quotes S mouth fell wide, open like a fish gasping for air. Mr. Henderson's face turned bright red, and then white as all the blood drained out of it. The other neighbors looked like they wanted to disappear into the ground. Mrs. Thompson put her hand over her heart like she might faint. Mr. Wilson's eyes got as big as dinner plates. The neighbors, who had been so confident and angry just moments before, now looked terrified and confused. "Yes, sir, I am," McKenna said with quiet dignity and grace. "I am Mayor McKenna Johnson. I've been the mayor of our city for 2 years now." Officer Martinez immediately straightened his shoulders and spoke with much more respect in his voice. He had voted for McKenna in the last election and admired the work she had done for their community. "Your Honor, I am deeply sorry about what has happened here today," Officer Martinez said formally. This is completely unacceptable behavior toward any citizen, but especially toward our mayor. The Hendersons looked like they wanted the ground to open up and swallow them whole. They had no idea. They had been harassing and bullying the most important elected official in their entire city. All their neighbors behind them started backing away slowly, trying to distance themselves from the embarrassing situation. "You're really the mayor," Mrs. Henderson whispered in complete shock and disbelief. "Yes, ma'am, I really am," McKenna replied calmly but with strength. "I'm the same mayor who approved funding for the new playground, where your grandchildren love to play. I'm the same mayor who organized the road repair project that fixed all the dangerous potholes on this very street last summer. I'm the same mayor who brought 3 new businesses to our downtown area, creating over 200 good-paying jobs for families in our community." Officer Johnson felt a surge of pride knowing McKenna personally. He had not only voted for her, but had volunteered for her campaign, because he believed in her vision for making their city better for everyone. Mr. Henderson single quotes, S face went from bright red to ghostly white as terrible memories flooded back to him. "Oh my God," he whispered to his wife. "Remember when my brother Tommy was out of work for 8 months? Remember who helped him get that job with the Parks Department?" Mrs. Henderson's hands started shaking as she remembered too. "And remember when your mother was in the hospital after her stroke? Remember who visited her personally and made sure she got the best care? That was Mayor Johnson," Mr. Henderson said, his voice cracking with shame and regret. "She helped our whole family when we needed it most, and we didn't even recognize her." "But you're so young to be mayor," Mrs. Henderson said weakly, still trying to process this shocking information. "I'm 32 years old," McKenna replied with patience, even though she was still hurting. "I worked hard my entire life to earn the trust of the people in this city so I could serve them. All the people, no matter what they look like or where they come from or how much money they have." Officer Johnson felt proud and honored to know McKenna personally. He remembered her campaign promises to make the city safer and more prosperous for everyone. She had kept every single promise she made. "Your Honor, what would you like us to do about this situation?" Officer Johnson asked respectfully. McKenna looked around at her destroyed cake and scattered decorations. She looked at David's heartbroken face as he surveyed all his hard work ruined. She looked at her wedding guests who had been frightened and upset by all the shouting and police cars. She looked at her mother, Rosa, whose eyes were filled with angry tears. Then McKenna looked at the Hendersons and the other neighbors who now seemed very ashamed and embarrassed. She could see the fear in their eyes. Not fear of her, but fear of the consequences of what they had done. Fear of being arrested or sued or publicly humiliated for attacking their own mayor on her wedding day. For a moment, McKenna felt angry enough to let them face those consequences. It would serve them right for being so cruel and heartless. They had judged her without knowing anything about her. They had destroyed her special day because of their own prejudice and ignorance. But then McKenna remembered something her mother Rosa had told her many years ago when kids at school were being mean to her. "Mia, when people hurt you, you have 2 choices," Rosa had said while braiding McKenna's hair for school. "You can hurt them back and keep the cycle of pain going forever, or you can choose to be bigger than their hate. You can show them a better way to be human. I want you to know something important," McKenna said to everyone listening, her voice carrying the wisdom her mother had given her. "When I was a little girl, my mom told me that hate is like a fire. If you throw more hate on it, the fire gets bigger and burns everything around it. But love and kindness are like water. They can put out even the biggest fires of hate." Mrs. Henderson started crying real tears of shame and regret. She realized how terribly wrong she had been about McKenna. "Mayor Johnson, I am so deeply sorry. We were absolutely terrible to you today. We judged you without knowing who you really are, or what you've done for all of us." The tears running down Mrs. Henderson's face were not fake tears meant to get her out of trouble. They were real tears from a heart that was finally understanding how badly she had acted. We heard rumors and stories about crime and property values, Mr. Henderson added, his voice shaking with embarrassment. We believed lies that other people told us instead of getting to know you as real people. We let fear and ignorance turn us into the kind of neighbors we never wanted to be. McKenna felt her anger beginning to melt away as she watched the Hendersons crying with genuine remorse. She realized that they weren't evil people who enjoyed hurting others. They were just frightened and confused people who had been fed lies about people who looked different from them. I forgive you both, McKenna said simply, and everyone in the backyard could hear that she really meant it. But we all need to do better as neighbors and as human beings. We need to choose love over fear, understanding over ignorance, and kindness over cruelty. Officer Martinez looked impressed and moved by McKenna's incredible grace under pressure. Your Honor, you are handling this situation with more dignity and wisdom than most people could manage. This is exactly the kind of leadership our community needs. David took McKenna's hand and squeezed it tight. He was so proud of his wife and amazed by her ability to turn such a painful situation into an opportunity for healing and growth. Sarah wiped tears from her own eyes as she watched her best friend respond to hatred with love. She had always known McKenna was special, but seeing her forgive people who had hurt her so deeply showed Sarah what true strength really looked like. Rosa felt her heart swelling with pride as she watched her daughter handle this crisis with such maturity and wisdom that all those years of working multiple jobs and sacrificing everything for McKenna's education had been worth it to see her daughter become such an amazing woman and leader. What can we possibly do to make this right? Mrs. Henderson asked through her tears. How can we fix the terrible thing we've done to you on your wedding day? McKenna thought for a moment, and then an idea formed in her mind that could transform this awful day into something truly beautiful and meaningful. Help me clean up this mess, McKenna said with a small smile beginning to appear on her face. Then go to Johnson's Bakery on Main Street and buy the most beautiful wedding cake you can find. Come back here and celebrate with us. Learn who we really are as people instead of believing stories about us. The Hendersons and the other neighbors looked shocked and amazed. After everything they had done, after all the pain they had caused, McKenna was inviting them to stay for her wedding. You really want us at your wedding celebration? Mrs. Henderson asked in disbelief. Every person deserves a second chance to do the right thing, McKenna replied with warmth in her voice. Every person deserves to be seen and known for who they really are inside their heart, not just for their worst moments, Sarah whispered to McKenna with concern. Are you absolutely sure about this? McKenna nodded with confidence. This is how we change the world and build better communities. One heart at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of forgiveness at a time, Officer Johnson smiled with admiration and respect. Your Honor, this is exactly why the people of this city love having you as their mayor. You don't just talk about bringing people together. You actually do it even when it's hard. The next 2 hours were absolutely amazing to watch. The Hendersons hurried to Johnson's Bakery and bought the most beautiful 3-layer wedding cake they could find, with white frosting and pink roses just like the original. They also bought fresh flowers to replace the ones that had been destroyed. When they returned, something magical began to happen. Mrs. Henderson worked side by side with Rosa hanging new decorations and arranging flowers. At first they worked in awkward silence, but slowly they started talking. Your daughter is remarkable, Mrs. Henderson said quietly as they hung paper lanterns together. I can't believe how gracious she's being after what we did to her. Rosa smiled proudly. McKenna has always had a big heart, even when she was little and kids were mean to her. She would come home and pray for them instead of being angry. I need to tell you something that's been weighing on my heart, Mrs. Henderson said with tears in her eyes. My husband and I have been scared about a lot of things lately. He lost his job at the factory last year, and we've been struggling to pay our bills. When people told us that black families moving in would make our house worth less money, we panicked. Because this house is all we have, Rosen nodded with understanding. I know what it's like to be afraid about money and the future. When Mackina was growing up, I worked 3 jobs just to keep us in our tiny apartment. Fear makes us do things we wouldn't normally do. Meanwhile, Mr. Henderson was helping David reset all the chairs and tables. I owe you both a huge apology, Mr. Henderson said as they worked together. Mayor Johnson helped my brother Tommy get a job with the city when he had been unemployed for months. She helped our whole family during the hardest time of our lives. And I didn't even recognize her. David could see that Mr. Henderson's regret was genuine. Mackina believes that people can change and grow. She sees the good in everyone, even when they can't see it in themselves. How does she do it? Mr. Henderson asked. With wonder. How does she stay so kind when the world can be so cruel? Her mother taught her that hate only creates more hate, David explained. But love and forgiveness can break the cycle and create something beautiful instead. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had lived on the street the longest, was helping Sarah arrange flowers on the tables. I'm ashamed of myself, Mrs. Thompson said quietly. I've lived here for 40 years, and I've seen this neighborhood change many times. But I let fear make me forget that every family deserves to be welcomed with kindness. It's never too late to make things right, Sarah replied gently. That's what Mackina would tell you. She believes in second chances for everyone. As the neighbors worked together to repair the damage they had caused, something beautiful began to happen. The barriers between them started breaking down. They began to see each other as real people with real feelings, hopes, and fears. Mr. Wilson, the retired police officer, was stringing lights with Mackina's Uncle Miguel. I need to confess something, Mr. Wilson said with shame in his voice. I used my background in law enforcement to make the other neighbors more afraid of you. I told them stories about crime statistics that weren't even true for our city, Uncle. Miguel looked at him with surprise, but not anger. Why would you do that? Because I was afraid of change, Mr. Wilson admitted. I'm 73 years old, and this street has been the same for decades. When I saw you and Mackina moving in, I panicked. About everything being different. Different doesn't have to mean bad, Uncle Miguel said wisely. My niece Mackina is different from other politicians because she actually cares about helping people instead of just getting votes. When all the decorations were restored and the new cake was beautifully displayed, Mackina looked around her backyard. With amazement, it looked even more beautiful than before, but more importantly, her neighbors who had been enemies an hour ago were now working together as friends. Are you ready to get married now? David asked with a huge smile on his face. Mackina looked at her wedding dress, which somehow had stayed clean through all the chaos. She looked at her family and friends, mixed together with neighbors who were becoming friends. She looked at the police officers who had stayed to make sure everything went smoothly. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, Mackina said with pure joy. The wedding ceremony was absolutely magical. Mackina and David stood under an arch of flowers while their pastor, Reverend Williams, performed the service. The Hendersons sat in the front row, with tears of happiness streaming down their faces. All the neighbors who had been so angry and hateful earlier were now clapping and cheering for the bride and groom. When Reverend Williams said, "You may kiss the bride," the entire backyard erupted in celebration. Mrs. Henderson cheered louder than anyone else. Mr. Wilson whistled and applauded. Mrs. Thompson threw flower petals in the air like confetti. During the reception, Mrs. Henderson asked if she could give a speech. Mackina nodded and handed her the microphone. Today I learned the most important lesson of my life, Mrs. Henderson said to the crowd of wedding guests and neighbors. I learned that I was completely wrong about my new neighbors. I learned that hate and fear only hurt everyone involved. Most importantly, I learned that our mayor is not just an outstanding leader for our city, but an extraordinary person who forgives even when she has every right to be angry. The entire crowd stood up and applauded. Many people were crying tears of joy and inspiration. Makina Johnson showed me what real strength looks like today, Mrs. Henderson continued. It's not the strength to hurt people back when they hurt you. It's the strength to love them and help them become better people. Makina stood up and hugged Mrs. Henderson while everyone cheered. It was a moment that would be remembered on Maple Street for many years to come. As the evening went on, the celebration became more and more joyful. White families and black families danced together under the string lights. Children who had never played together before were running around the backyard, laughing and having fun. Adults who had been strangers that morning were exchanging phone numbers and making plans for future gatherings. Officer Martinez came over to say goodbye before his shift ended. Your Honor, what happened here today will be talked about in our community for years to come. You turned a situation that could have become really ugly into something beautiful and healing. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become doorways to the best moments, Makina replied. If the Hendersons hadn't knocked over my cake this morning, we might have stayed strangers forever. Now we're going to be real neighbors and friends. As the night ended, the Hendersons and other neighbors helped clean up every bit of the party. They washed dishes, folded chairs, and took down decorations as if it had been their own family celebration. Thank you for giving us a chance to make things right, Mrs. Henderson said as she hugged Makina goodbye. Thank you for showing us that there's a better way to treat people. Thank you for proving that people's hearts can change, Makina replied warmly. 6 months later, Maple Street had become known as the friendliest street in the entire city. The Hendersons had learned the truth about their own fears and prejudices, and they shared their story with other neighbors throughout the city. They organized monthly block parties where families from every background came together to eat, dance, and celebrate their community. Mrs. Henderson became one of Makina's most dedicated volunteers, helping with voter registration drives and community service projects. Mr. Henderson used his carpentry skills to help build playground equipment for the city's new family park. Makina continued to be an outstanding mayor, winning her next election by the largest margin in the city's history. People from every neighborhood, every race, and every economic background supported her because they had seen how she brought people together with love instead of dividing them with politics. David and Makina lived happily in their home on Maple Street. 2 years later, they welcomed twin daughters named Hope and Grace. The little girls grew up playing with children from every kind of family on their street, learning from the very beginning that what makes people special isn't the color of their skin, but the kindness in their hearts. Mrs. Henderson became like a grandmother to Hope and Grace, reading them stories and teaching them how to bake cookies. Mr. Henderson built them a beautiful wooden swing set in their backyard. The whole neighborhood helped celebrate their birthday parties and watch them take their first steps. Rosa, Makina's mother, lived long enough to see her granddaughter start school. She was so proud of the community her daughter had built through love and forgiveness. You changed the whole world, Mia, Rosa told Makina shortly before she passed away peacefully. Not the big world, but your little world. And that's how the big world changes too. One little world at a time. The wedding cake that got destroyed on that terrible morning became a symbol throughout the city of how something broken can become something even more beautiful. Every year on their anniversary, Makina and David invited the entire neighborhood over for cake and music, remembering how love conquered hate on Maple Street. Local newspapers wrote articles about the Maple Street miracle. Schools invited Makina to speak to students about forgiveness and community building. Churches asked her to share her story about turning enemies into friends. Makina always kept her mother's words close to her heart as the most important lesson. Of all. Hate only grows bigger when you feed it with more hate. But love and kindness can change even the hardest, angriest hearts. And that's exactly what happened on the day, when a destroyed wedding cake became the beginning of a beautiful friendship. That transformed an entire community and showed everyone what's possible when we choose love over fear. The story of Mayor McKenna Johnson's wedding day spread far beyond Maple Street, inspiring people in cities and towns across the country to look at their own neighbors with new eyes, to choose understanding over suspicion, and to remember that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It became a reminder that one person's courage to forgive can create ripples of change that spread farther than anyone could ever imagine.